This is lesson 14, and in this lesson we're going to continue the work that we started in class on methods with an emphasis on how you actually return numbers from or values from a method. So we're going to start by creating a method called giveMeA2. And what this method is going to do is nothing more than trying to send the number 2 back to the caller, back to the entity which actually called on this method. You do this in Ruby by using the keyword return and then the value that you want to return, and that's it. So when I say define giveMeA2 and return 2, remember that nothing happens until the method is actually called. So in our case, we're going to call the method by simply putting a puts giveMeA2. And what's going to happen with that is that when I go to run the program, it prints the number 2 on screen. Why does it print the number 2 on screen? Because the call on giveMeA2 sends Ruby to the method giveMeA2, which itself returns the value 2, and essentially the number 2 replaces the call on giveMeA2. So this line 4 is equivalent to essentially puts 2. What I could have done, in fact, instead of doing this, is that I could have actually assigned the value returned by giveMeA2 to the variable x, and then I could print x. So this is a way of actually having your program do something complex and then return the final value of its work, which can then get reused somewhere else. So again, if I then go and I run this program, it prints the number 2 because that's actually what is in x. Of course, if all the program did is just return a value, it would make a lot of sense to put that inside of a method. So we're going to define now a method a little bit more sophisticated. We're going to call it square, and it's going to take a parameter p, and what it will do with this parameter p, it will return its square. So it will take the value of p, and it will square it, and it will return it. And now what I can do is that I can say puts square of 3. What does this do? This calls the method square with a parameter of 3. So the local variable p gets assigned to 3. 3 square is 9, and therefore the value 9 is returned from the method, and the number 9 should then be printed on screen. Let's try it. And indeed, we get the number 9. Okay, we could have also done square of 4. I mean, this is the reason why you do methods, so you can actually call them with different arguments, different parameters. And if you do that, we print 9 and we print 16. All right, let's switch gear a little bit now. Let's talk about the concept of locality. This is a very tricky concept in Ruby, and actually in every programming language, or most programming languages which work this way. The basic idea of locality is that a variable that you create inside of a method only lives inside of this method. So all variables created inside of a method live there. Let me demonstrate what I mean by that. Let's say that I create a new method, and we're going to call it change the value of a to the number 2. Okay, a very silly method that actually has a variable called a and changes it to the value 2. And I'm just going to actually print this value of a inside of with a message to remind me that I'm inside of the method. Now outside of the method, I am going to actually set a variable called a equal to 1. And I'm going to then call on change a to 2, and then I want to print the value of a outside of the method. So you might be tempted to think at this point that, well, you know, all the a's are created equal. Here's a equals 1. What we are going to go to change a to 2 is going to change a to 2, and a will be 2 everywhere in the program. And this is not the case. If I run this, you can see very clearly that inside of the method, the variable a is changed to 2, but when you come back outside of the method, it is back to its original value of 1. Why is that? It is because this a right here inside of the method only exists in the context of the method and has nothing to do actually with the a outside of the method, even though they have the same name. This is very, very tricky. Okay? So a equals 1, we call a method, it does its thing, but the caller doesn't really care in this case. There's no return values, no nothing. It's just a local a being set to 2 and printed. And then when we come back out, that a equals 2 disappears and we're back to a equals 1. To make it even trickier, this does not apply to arrays. So what do I mean by that? So imagine that I create a method called changeArray. And what we're going to do with this method is that we're going to make sure that it receives as a parameter an array, which we're going to put in a variable called ARY. And the job this method will do is to set the first value of the array to the number 4. And then we will just again, we're going to try to examine what's going on here. And we're going to put ary.inspect as a way to see what the array looks like inside of the method. And then outside of the method, I'm going to put a variable. I'm going to call it something different just to actually really prove the point. I'm going to create the array 1, 2, 3. And I'm going to call changeArray. And I'm going to pass it array as a parameter. And then outside of this method, I will then print the value of array after we have done making the change. Now, if you remember the previous example with the number, the variable a, which held just a number, nothing changed when you went inside of the method. With an array, it works differently. Basically, you want to think that arrays, wherever, if you pass an array to a method, is gonna get changed. If you're passing a number or a string or a float or a boolean, these values, these local variables that hold these values inside of methods will not change. So let's take a look now. And you can see what happened. We started with array being 1, 2, 3. We called the method. The first thing the method did was to change the first element of the array to 4, and indeed inside of the method we ended up with the array 4, 2, 3. But then we left the method and came back, and you might be tempted to think that your original array was left unchanged, but in this case the method actually changes the actual array. So let's try to recap that. If you have an array and you pass it to a method, the actual array will be changed. If you have a number or a string or a character or a boolean, you pass it to a method, the method will not change the value of that local variable outside of the method. This is lesson 14.